Today I'm going to be telling you about the Flashforge Adventure 5X, and this review is going to be a little bit different because I don't actually have the printer anymore. I got an early production unit and tested it about 4 or 5 months ago, and since then I've given the printer away, but they've made some updates to the machine, so I feel like I need to cover those here. So I'm going to give you the TLDR about what's going on with the Adventure 5X, and if you want to watch this full review, I'll show you all the little details about how the machine works. But the short version is, the Flashforge Adventure 5X is basically a low-cost version of the flagship multicolor printers that have been coming out lately. The thing that it's most similar to is the Bambu Lab P1P, but it's coming in at a price point of about half of that machine. How are they able to do that? Well, basically, they've shrunken the size just a little bit. Instead of 256 by 256, it's a 220 by 220 build area, which is big enough for most average size print jobs. And instead of selling the multicolor unit as a separate add-on, they've included it built into the machine. So a lot of other printer companies will sell you the 3D printer that just works with one color, and then sell you the upgrade kit, whether that's a CFS from Creality, or an AMS from Bambu Lab, or an MMU from Prusa. They always sell you like the second thing that basically costs as much as an entirely new printer to add multicolor to the printer that you've already bought. With the Flashforge Adventure 5X, they've basically incorporated all of the multicolor functionality into the base machine. It allowed them to simplify things and invest in tooling that makes it really cheap to manufacture these things, despite being pretty high quality and reliable printers. Most of the footage in this review was filmed 4 or 5 months ago with a beta test machine, but since then they've just made a couple of improvements to it, and even that early model functioned quite well, which you'll see in this video. But I mentioned I no longer have the printer anymore, so what happened to it? Well, I took it with me on a cross-country flight and traveled with it around the Oregon coast a little bit, and eventually dropped it off with my mom. It's one of those printers that's easy enough to use and reliable enough that I would actually consider gifting it to someone else. A lot of these printers that have issues, I'm like, I don't want to burden anyone with this. So I gave this printer to my mom, and she's been printing stuff with it, and it's been working fine for her. And it was interesting to see her reaction to it. The only other printer that she has is like a really old one. I think it was either a Tronxy Crux or a Kingroon KLP5 or something like that. It's one of those really old cantilever-style bed slingers, and it's super slow. You know, it's running the speeds that the original Ender 3s ran at, so about 50 millimeters a second. And the Adventure 5X runs at 300 to 500 millimeters a second, kind of what we expect from modern day high-speed printers, and she was really excited about it. So I think one of the things that a lot of us in the 3D printing community lose perspective of is how amazing modern machines are and how fast they are compared to what was available just 2 years ago. But also that trip proved to me that this is a pretty good travel printer because the box is really small and light, and I was able to ship it around without too much issues. It survived the baggage handlers at the airport, and all I needed to do to ship it was take the screen off and fold it down and tape it in place and put it back in the box that the printer came in. And it's small and light enough to check as a checked bag, and it's light enough to carry around the airport. So overall, great travel printer, and it's a low enough cost printer that I wouldn't be too concerned if it got dropped and damaged in shipping. So that could be a niche use that some of you might have for this printer. In terms of updates to the machine, so if you were to buy one of these today, it'll be slightly different than the machine that I reviewed in this video, because the firmware is going to be updated and the spool holders were updated so that they can fit multiple sizes of spools. Basically, any 1 kilogram sized spool will be able to fit on this machine. It's using a spring-loaded spool holder design that's really similar to what you see on the Bambu Lab AMS Lite. And that was the only small gripe I had with this machine, is that it was using a special spool holder that was designed specifically to work with Flashforge's own spools, and it wasn't adjustable in size. But now they've solved that problem by switching to something that allows you to use whatever spools you want. Also, one last note before I get into the original review that I filmed a couple months ago, where you'll get to see all the internal workings of this machine. I wanted to say something to address the modders out there. Some of you might be wondering if you can flash the firmware on this or get Clipper running on it or whatever. The short answer is maybe. So the older versions of the Adventure 5 series, the Adventure 5M and the Adventure 5M Pro, someone uploaded a custom firmware that you can upload onto those machines and get regular Clipper working on it. So I imagine the same thing will happen with these machines, but time will tell for that. It's not guaranteed that you'll be able to modify it, but it seems likely since someone was able to reverse engineer and upload a custom firmware on the previous versions of the machine. Okay, without further ado, let's get into the review that I filmed a little while ago and get into all the gory details about this machine. Here goes. Welcome to another episode of Nathan Builds Robots. Today we're going to be taking a look at the Flashforge Adventurer 5X. We'll be firing up a test print, going over the mechanisms, and seeing what sets this machine apart from others in the competition. This video is sponsored by Flashforge, so we'll be able to take the time and look at all the different features of this machine and see if it's right for you. So let's go over all the new features on this machine. Now if you have an Adventurer 5, you'll be familiar with this touchscreen interface, and the print head looks pretty similar. However, on the inside, a lot of this is set up quite differently. The Adventurer 5M basically looks like this without the multicolor stuff on the side, and the Adventurer 5M Pro has the same overall frame, but it's an enclosed 3D printer that's really quiet and has nice filtration systems built in. So I really hope they come out with an Adventurer 5X Pro. That would probably be the one that I spring for. This one's more of a low-cost entry-level printer for people that want to get into high-speed multicolor 3D printing or want to set up a bunch of these as part of a print farm. So all this stuff on the side here is new. We've got these 4 spool holders. They're currently loaded up with filament. And the way these work is they feed into this unit that has motors built into it, and then those will individually feed filament into the hot end. It's kind of like a low-cost mashup of a lot of other multicolor 3D printing systems on the market. This one's just geared to be as inexpensive as possible and slapped onto the side of the machine so that you don't have to buy additional add-ons. Now if you want to, you can remove the multicolor unit and just operate this as a single color printer, but I think you're really going to be missing out on what this machine can offer if you're running this in single color mode. So you can see here we've got 4 spools of filament all feeding into their respective little tubes here, and they all come along the top here and go into the hot end. This type of multi-material system is pretty basic. It just retracts the filament far enough back so that it can feed the other filament in, so it's not having to deal with long retraction phases. And when it needs to rewind filament, it's not having to wind a whole lot of material back onto the spool. And because they don't have to rewind the filament very far, they're able to get away with something pretty clever here. You can see when I pull this material forward, as if I'm feeding it into the printer, it automatically springs back a little bit. You can see it works pretty nicely here, and it just has to retract a couple centimeters to accommodate the retraction that occurs up here. If we take this off, you can see a little bit closer how this works. It's basically just a little lever that rotates like this, and it basically moves along with the spool as it's feeding, and then when it retracts, it just slides back like that. And this is able to just retract that tiny little bit of filament so that everything works the way it's supposed to and everything stays wound on the reel. Inside of this little motor unit, we've got a little electrical connector that goes to the back of the machine that runs over here into the side of this little module. And then there's a bunch of sensors and motors and extruder gears inside of here that can individually feed these different filaments. I imagine the internal construction is pretty similar to the Prusa MMU3, but I'm not exactly sure how this all works. And I don't really want to take it apart right now, but we're going to test it out with some prints today. This machine has the ubiquitous poop chute that is used in most multicolor printing systems. Basically, it's going to dump material down that little hole and wipe the hot end on this little pad to get it cleaned off so that it can resume printing with a new color, or when it's purging at the start of a print. It's got a little system here to be able to flick away the extruded plastic. I think this is actually a really good design, and it's super compact back here, so it's not affecting the overall size and shape of the printer. And that just comes out the back here. If you want, you can attach some kind of storage solution to be able to hold on to those. Otherwise, they're just going to fall on the floor directly behind the machine. Adding to the print farm vibes of this machine, we've got an Ethernet port back here, and you can also hook it up with Wi-Fi. If you're running a print farm, a lot of people like to use Ethernet connections just because if you've got 50 or 100 3D printers set up in a room, then all those Wi-Fi signals could conflict with each other. But by hooking it up on Ethernet, you bypass a lot of those issues. And then if we look around the rest of this machine, you can see we've got a pretty standard type of 3 lead screw configuration. It's actually got 2 linear rails in the back, which is kind of an interesting choice. I guess that just helps stiffen up the support in that back region a little bit. And then it's got these little pods for filters. I assume they're unpopulated because this machine doesn't have an enclosure, but it's sharing the same chassis with the Adventurer 5X Pro. If that comes out, that'll have an enclosure and it'll have filtration and probably be a lot quieter. Okay, so let's go over here and fire up a print. It looks like we've got plenty of test prints loaded up onto the machine. Let's try out our 3D Benchy in Multicolor. We're just going to run all the calibrations and enable the IFS, which is apparently what they're calling this multi-filament system. And we're going to hit next. I've already gone through and manually mapped these filament colors so that you can see them here. They kind of look like, you know, this one's the black one, this one's this bluish one, and then we've got the green and this grayish color. I don't need to print this model using any specific colors, so we're just going to fire this up. I guess we hit this button, which should print the thing out. Oh, please select the print material. And I can actually double up these colors. So if I want to have multiple of them printing in that green color, we can do that. So we'll go ahead and print, and let's see it happen. This machine uses force-based bed leveling, so it just homed at the bottom of the machine, and then I believe it's got load cells inside of this plate to be able to detect when the nozzle touches it. Also, something that's a little bit different than the previous Adventure 5 models is the hot end. You can see this is kind of different from what we've seen before. It's not using the old quick swap Adventure 5 nozzles. I thought those were pretty cool. You just press 2 buttons and the nozzle popped out. This one is using some kind of new nozzle setup. It looks like it's got a pretty long melt zone, and it's got some little parts made out of spring steel, it looks like. So it should facilitate faster nozzle changes. We'll have to take a look at that once the printer's running. Also, another cool touch that they've added is this part cooling fan. Has electrical contacts up here. You can see them up at the top, and those automatically plug in when you attach this to the printer. So when you pull this front cover off, there's no wires. You just put it back on, and it facilitates the electrical connections, and that fan is now connected to the printer. It's held on with a couple little pins and magnets, so this slips on nice and easily. And let's get into my first annoyance with the machine is the fan noise. This little fan here is pretty loud. It's like one of these tiny little fans. If we open up my decibel testing meter, we can see how loud that is. So an arm's length away, we're going to check the volume. So it's about 45 decibels just with that hot end fan turned on. That's the one that blows over the heat sink and makes sure you don't get any heat creep. And then it turned on the part cooling fan just earlier, and that bumped up the noise levels to I think about 55 decibels. And when the machine's moving around, that adds even more noise on top of that. So this isn't the type of machine that I'd want working right next to me, like on a desk or in my bedroom. I think the Adventure 5M Pro was a lot quieter and a lot nicer to have around the office, but that was only a single color machine. I'm hoping they adapt this multicolor system over to a Pro model so that we get an enclosure and all of those nice features in addition to this multicolor system. So we'll see if that happens. It seems like an obvious thing for them to do next, but we'll have to wait and see when that comes out. All right, now it's doing the load cell based bed leveling. That'll make sure we have a good first layer. If we take our little magnet and stick it to the frame, you can see it attaches. So this is a steel frame, not aluminum. So it's basic stamped steel construction, and this base is made out of an injection molded piece of plastic. So overall, we've got a pretty low cost construction. All of the linear motion for the Core XY system and the Z axis are all running on linear bearings. These are just, you know, those same type of linear rods. Interesting to note, the bearings for the Y and the Z are thinner than the bearings for the X axis. And the reason that is because these X axis bearings are moving. When the Y axis moves forwards and backwards, you know, this rod has to be accelerated front and back, which, you know, if this is heavier, then that's going to slow the printer down. However, they've gotten around that by using hollow linear rods. I don't know if you can see that here. I've got my phone on the other end. Oh, and I guess it's being blocked by the spool back there. Well, it's kind of hard to see, but you're gonna have to trust me that I've seen it. They're hollow on the inside. You can see that's like the inside diameter of that rod. And that's just a basic structural engineering trick to make something stiffer and lighter, is to use hollow tubes instead of solid ones. The downside is those hollow precision ground tubes are more expensive than the solid ones, but they're able to minimize the additional cost by only using them on the X-axis. Any of the ones that aren't actually moving are just solid, heavy steel. So, you know, I just think that's pretty interesting and clever. Then if you look at these bearing blocks that are housing the bearings for the belts, you can see those are just injection molded plastic, and same up on the front. So this is a pretty typical construction for 3D printers these days. It just helps them offer these machines at a really low price. Also, we've got some belt tensioning screws back there, so I assume you loosen those up and I think that'll let you adjust the belt tension. I might have to mess with that. It seems like the belt tension's just fine straight out of the box, but if you needed to adjust them, it's pretty easy to access those screws. The bed, this is a really nice touch. It's got a little injection molded plastic piece so that it's easier to grab onto the bed. You're not having to hold on to something that's 80 or 100 degrees Celsius. You just use this little plastic grip, and it's really nice. And when you slide, then when you slide it back, it butts into these little back pieces, so it's really easy to get the bed reinstalled. It's got a little lever over here on the side, and that's going to let you, cut the filament. And you can see that it just popped out. It's got a little mechanism over here off to the side where when it moves the y-axis all the way forward, it makes this little pin pop out. Oh, gotta watch out. And then it presses that button, which cuts the filament. So right now I assume it's loading all of the different materials up and making sure that everything's primed and ready to start the print job. One thing to note is this machine is a little bit smaller than the Bamboo Lab printers. Those are 256 by 256. This machine is 220 by 220. So it's more geared towards printing smaller objects at high speed. But one of the advantages of this smaller size is it's less expensive, it can print faster, and the box that it comes in is extremely small. Here's the box, and I don't know, it's like really small and manageable and easy to move around. The same could be said of the printer. It's pretty easy to pick this thing up because it's smaller and lighter than basically everything else in its class. The whole machine comes pre-assembled. You just have to attach the multicolor system off to the side. That just helps them pack it down a little bit more when they fit it in the box. Basically, I did all the prep work to set this machine up, and then I was carrying it to another room and some of the spools fell off the side. And now the machine's a little bit confused as to its current state. So let's get everything going again, and I guess I'll just push the correct filament. One issue I can see with this system is if you have any filament breakage that's inside of the tube here, it's not going to be able to retract the old filament back. So, so that would probably result in some kind of jam. I think that's true of basically every multicolor system. If you have a breakage between the spool and... oh, okay, I see what's happening. So the machine's trying to pull this filament back to be able to retract that filament, but it's not able to because of the breakage there. So I think what I'm going to have to do is take this machine apart a little bit and basically extract this little piece of broken filament, and then everything should get working again. Because basically it has a sensor in the top part of the extruder that now it's trying to feed this one in, and yeah, the machine's getting a little confused because of the odd state of things that I left it in. Okay, now that we don't have a broken piece of filament inside of the machine, it should work a lot better. So yeah, basically if you drop all your filament on the floor and things get kind of snapped, you definitely need to go through and make sure that everything's clear and there's no broken piece of filament inside of the tube here. Otherwise, it's not going to be able to clear that out. I guess they could write a procedure to help clear that out by figuring out which filament is the one that's stuck in the tube and just purging the entire length of filament throughout the entire Bowden tube. That could probably work to get everything cleared out because, you know, it's got a sensor here that knows that there's a piece of filament present in this junction, and it's not going to feed the next filament until it knows that one has been removed. So yeah, it's pretty easy to just take this off, pull this tab, clear out that piece of filament, and put it back together. And now that I know how to do that, I don't think I'll have too much issues there. At least I'll be less confused. I think now everything should be pretty much set. We got all the filaments loaded up, there's no broken pieces inside of these tubes, and the machine should just work from here on out. So let's let it do its thing and see how the print turns out. This printer is insanely fast though, so let's take a look at this. Okay, so now we can see the multicolor unit doing its thing. It just unloaded the this filament over here. Now it's loading up that filament over in the back. You can see it's turning. And that's getting purged into the poop chute. Once that's done, it's going to get flung out the back here. I really like this setup. I think it's going to be a lot more reliable than a lot of the other systems on the market because it deposits the extra filament in a little pile and then it just flings the whole thing. Like there's a big wall that moves over and shoves it all out of the way. So I think this is probably a more reliable system than any of the others that I've seen on the market. Like I really don't see how it could fail. And now we hear the printer making angry printer noises. So yeah, this printer isn't the quietest. If you have issues with the multicolor system where things don't feed properly, the tooltips that it provides aren't super helpful. Fortunately, I was able to figure it out, but it would be better if the printer prompted me with a little message saying, like, broken piece of filament in the Bowden tube or something, and gave me some advice on how to fix it. Again, that was completely my fault because I was moving this around and I dropped the spools off the side and ended up with a broken piece of filament inside of the tube. But it's nice to make things as idiot-proof as possible, and I think that's something that just comes with time and maturity of the system. Since this is basically the first version of this multicolor system from Flashforge, they don't have the advantage of time that Prusa and Bamboo Lab and Creality have, where they've had these multicolor systems out on the market for a while, and they've been able to tune the firmware and give really good feedback on how to exactly fix things. I think that's something that's just going to come with time, with firmware updates. But in terms of something that just works, I think this is at that stage where they're able to produce something that makes prints reliably, and they're just going to need some more time to get all the bugs out and get things tuned to the point where it's more user-friendly. That's part of the Nathan Builds Robots experience. I get these machines really early on, so they're kind of in beta test mode. So as they continue to develop on this platform, we can only hope it's going to get better. Alright, so I've been printing with this Adventure 5X for a couple of days now. I've been running through all the test prints, and what I can say is that the print quality on this thing is actually extremely good. Here's your first layer quality. Really nice, consistent. It just picks up the texture of the PEI sheet. Then see if you can spot any layer lines on this print. Super consistent layers. Everything stacks really nicely, one on top of another. This is just really good print quality altogether. Then I also did this print, which was a multicolor print, and this was kind of a torture test because there's a lot of small details, a lot of rapid color changes as this part is being printed, and it's got all these interlocking pieces because it's one of these kind of wiggly toy things. It also prints a purge block, which I think you can disable in the slicer settings, and it also poops. Just like every kind of multicolor system that works like this, it has to purge out the filament with every color change, so you end up with a large amount of waste material because of that. But what I really wanted to test out on this machine was the multicolor system to see how it worked, how reliable is it, how does it behave with, you know, various third-party spools of filament. The only issue that I had the entire time that I've been running this machine is one of the spools that I loaded onto this machine at first was kind of crumbly, like, you know, when PLA gets really old and you bend it back and forth a couple times, it's just super brittle and it breaks apart. Well, when it loaded into this machine, it pulled in a little fragmented piece of that, and it caused a failure because when it tried to retract that filament, it couldn't actually get it out of the tube because, you know, it's just like a floating broken piece of filament inside of there. So it paused the print and I had to go in there and manually remove it. But after I replaced it with this new spool of filament, I haven't had any issues with it so far. It's been able to run just fine. In terms of the retractions, it's only withdrawing about 40 to 50 millimeters of filament, so it never gets to the point where it's like causing a ton of filament to bunch up here. On some other multicolor systems, it needs to retract like 300 or 500 millimeters worth of filament, so that's like over a foot, maybe 2 feet of filament getting drawn back into the system, so you have to have a motorized thing to, you know, re-spool that filament. However, since this is only retracting about 2 inches or less, it never gets to the point where you're having issues from those retractions. This is probably not like the official Flashforge stance on this, but even on these third-party spools that didn't actually fit on these systems properly, I haven't had any issues just because the amount of material that gets pulled back onto them is never enough to pop off the sides or do something weird. So we're hundreds of color changes into this machine and everything seems to be working just fine. These test prints, as well as the Benchy that I ran, That also turned out just fine. So this machine is really just designed to be a compact, reliable, multicolor system as an all-in-one solution. And what sets this machine apart from others is how low the price is, and it's a little bit smaller than other machines, which is a pro and a con. The pro is that it's smaller, takes up less space on your desk. The box that it ships in is smaller, it's lighter, it's really easy to pick up and move around. But you know, you've only got 220 millimeters of printable area instead of some other machines that have 256 or 300 or 350. This machine is on the smaller side of multicolor systems. However, it's coming in at a great price, and having the multicolor system built into the machine itself and kind of just using this side of the machine to attach everything to it, I think is really nice, and it means they can drive the cost down a little bit more. It takes up even less space, and you don't have to buy two standalone machines and combine them. Instead, you just get it as an all-in-one unit. And this Core XY system is borrowed from the Adventure 5M and 5M Pro. It's a well-tested and reliable system. It produces great print quality, and it's extremely fast. So in terms of print speed and quality, I don't think you're going to have any complaints with a machine like this. Altogether, we have print speed, we have quality, we have a low price, we have a multicolor system that's built into the machine. This machine has a lot to offer, and it's a great value overall. Now, who would I recommend this product to? Well, personally, if I were running a multicolor print farm, I would stock it with machines like this for doing basic, smaller parts. It's fast and affordable, has great print quality and reliability, but there is one downside to this machine, and I would say that's got to be the noise that it makes. Redoing the decibel tests in here, if we get an arm's length away, we're looking at 57 decibels. When it's doing this kind of purging and nozzle wiping and slapping kind of noise, it's probably bumping up to 61 or 62 decibels. So it's by no means a quiet machine. That's one of my favorite things about the Adventure 5M Pro that I tested before. It was one of the quietest machines that I've ever tested on my channel. It was super quiet, and it had a really good air filtration system, so I could barely smell it when it was operating. It was like a perfect stealth printer. But this machine is a lot louder, and there's no air filtration because it has no enclosure, so it's going to release more plastic fumes into the area that you're operating it in. And that's why I think this is really more suitable for a print farm environment, or if you have a garage that you can set it in, that would be fine. It's not really an office-friendly machine because of the amount of noise that it makes. So if you can set this up in a garage, or if you have a warehouse where you're running a print farm, then I think this machine would fit right in. However, it's just a little bit noisy for everyday office use. That's why I'm really hoping that they're working on an Adventure 5X Pro that has the multicolor system like this, but also has an enclosure like the Adventure 5M Pro did. Then you'd get the best of both worlds. And I guess the other downside with this machine is the size. If 220 millimeters by 220 millimeters isn't enough for you, then, you know, this machine obviously isn't going to work out for you. Having a smaller print bed on a multicolor machine ends up being a little bit more wasteful because you can't run as large of batches. Batching is a really good way to cut down on multi-material waste when you're changing colors in between layers, because it only has to change colors for every layer that occurs. And when you run 100 copies of the same part, then you still have the same number of layer changes, therefore you end up with the same amount of poop in the end, or waste material. So what ends up happening is the number of layers doesn't change, but the number of parts that you get out at the end does, which improves your efficiency. With a smaller print bed like this, you're not going to be able to run as large of batches, so it won't be as efficient as some of the larger multicolor printers. However, it will be more efficient than some of the smaller multicolor printers. I think the only one that's smaller than this that comes to mind is the Bamboo Lab A1 Mini. So if you're looking for a small, cheap farm machine to do multicolor parts for smaller printing objects, I think this would be a good substitute for that. But as they say with car engines, there's no replacement for displacement. So, you know, having a larger print volume is always going to be better. And this one is clearly just a little bit smaller than a lot of the competition. But it's still a decent size, and this machine is really well built and seems to be very kinematically reliable. So, you know, take that for what it's worth. So once again, I'd like to thank Flashforge for sponsoring this video and sending me a Adventure 5X to check out. I really like this machine, and you know, like I said, if I was building a print farm to make small to medium-sized parts, I'd probably start with this machine and then probably get some larger machines to supplement it. But having the multicolor system built into the side here, coming in at a really affordable price, taking up a very minimal footprint on the desk, I think makes this a really good option if you want to get a lot of printers running in a small area. And who knows, maybe I can talk them into installing a quieter fan on here. The main source of noise on this thing is just this one fan that's on the hot end, and if they replaced that with something quieter, this machine would be several decibels less noisy, and that would be much appreciated to my ears. But as it stands, this is more of your garage, workshop, print farm type of printer that makes a little bit more noise, and in those instances, you know, you'd be okay with that. For me, being in this office, I hate running this thing. It's too loud, but you know, that's not going to be a problem for everyone, so take that with a grain of salt. Let's finish this episode up by just watching this print for a little bit. I really think this is one of the fastest multicolor printers on the market right now. Flashforge really pushes the speeds to be really high, and they make sure that everything is built sturdy enough to support those speeds without getting excessive banding or inaccuracies in the print. Alright, so thanks for watching. If you want to see more prints coming off of this machine, let me know in the comments below what you would like to see. But again, you know, I'd like something quieter, and maybe there'll be an Adventure 5X Pro in the future that I would really like to check out. Okay, see you in the next episode. Also, one last thing I forgot to mention, this machine is designed to work with Orca Slicer. So, you know, you're using that nice open source slicer that's got all those features. And instead of Flashforge trying to make their own slicer, they're just going with the good old Orca Slicer, which I think we can all appreciate.